In this video, we're going to look at a few different methods for building our chess set. Now, we've already got a few techniques under our belt, and we can use hard slab, pinch, or coil to work on our chess sets. The nice thing about working at the scale of a chess set is it's essentially a figurine scale, and that means that we don't have to worry too much about things being hollow, although you can take care to hollow out the main form. Most little details, you're not going to have to worry about that. So I'm going to show you just how to start building from a solid piece of clay, but keep in mind that you can use any of the techniques we've learned. For my chess set, I've decided to make a set of mythological creatures, and also I'm going to bring some abstraction in. So thinking about mythological creatures, but then abstracting them just to be weird or funny. So I've drawn up what those look like. So how will I know which piece is the knight, for example? Am I going to use formal elements from a traditional knight piece, or will I somehow indicate it in another way? So maybe instead of using the little, instead of using a realistic horse, maybe I will use some other element to symbolize a horse, like a horseshoe, or maybe I will use another animal altogether, right? I am doing a creature theme, so I'm going to use a creature that looks like an animal that maybe you could ride. For the king and queen, king and queen, they have a lot of meaning. And in chess, they denote a hierarchy. So how will you show which is the most powerful piece? In my set, maybe I would switch the ideas of king and queen, or maybe I'd get rid of the idea of gender altogether. Since I'm just doing mythological creatures, maybe there'll be some other method to show their hierarchy. But of course, that is necessary for the game, so you'll have to, just connote it in some way. Okay, so for our chess sets, we are making 12 pieces, so one entire back row of one side of the game, and then at least 4 pawns. Again, you're welcome to make an entire side or an entire set, but I will be looking for 12 fully formed sculptures. For pieces that have a pair, like for example the knight, you do need to make 2. They don't need to be exactly the same, but you want to make it very clear that they are the same piece. They are the same species, the same family. And yeah, let me show you how I make one of my pieces. Okay, so I've got my little chunk of clay. I have an idea from my sketches, the idea of the shape I'm going for. So I right now can pound the clay into that shape. I can also use tools to take away clay. For example, I could use my wire tool to take away some of the clay, depending on the character shape that I want. I could also use this ribbon tool that came with my set, this one or the bigger one, to take away some clay. Right now I'm just taking the bigger chunks of clay away. Alright, now I can just sort of model this. So modeling just means I'm smushing the clay. I'm using that quality of the clay. So I want it to look like something that could be ridden by other creatures. So I'm going to use this kind of horse back shape, but not too realistically. And then I'm going to start to gently squeeze out some shape for a head. Okay, I want it to balance really well, so I want my bottom to stay nice and wide so that I get that balance when it's on the board. Alright, so I'm going to go ahead and go with this large shape I'm gonna make all 12 of my pieces about this size. Obviously the king and queen will be taller and the pawns will be smaller, but I like this size to be able to work with the clay. You can go a bit smaller, but not too small, because remember, teeny tiny pieces won't count toward your number of 12. And you could go a little bigger if you wanted, but you do have 12 pieces to complete, so just keep that in mind. So yeah, I'm just gonna keep molding, and something else I can do is, if I decide I actually want more clay, like maybe I want this to be more of like a bulbous hump, I can go ahead and add clay now. Because it's totally soft, it's completely plastic, I can just smush it on. Okay, I'm going to turn it around, keep turning it around so that I can see if it's symmetrical. My creature doesn't need to be completely symmetrical, but I do want it to be generally symmetrical. Give it a bit of a neck. Okay. You want to stay away from any forms that are too teeny tiny, because they're going to be hard to keep from drying too much, so they may fall off. Alright, so I'm adding on some, maybe these are ears, I don't know, spikes. So remember, when this is completely plastic, I can just smush. If I set this aside, so this head, I'm seeing some wiggle here, I don't want to continue wiggling this because that can really stress the clay. So I may need to do kind of like we did with our coil pots, where I wrap this because I want to keep working on it, but I let this be a little bit exposed to the air so it gets a little more firm here, because clay remembers. I'm going to keep working on this, and I'll check back in a few minutes. I'm just putting the rough cuts in, and once this gets a little bit more stiff, I can start to add the details, and when I do that, I'll want you to scratch and score everything. When I want to give something eyes, to give an idea of sockets, I can go ahead and use my finger or a tool if I have one, and I can kind of push in. That gives that idea of sockets. And obviously you can push in more or less depending on your creature, whether it's a skull or it's not a skull. Okay, give this thing some eyeballs. And with this, I'm going to go ahead, because I want to keep this ball shape, I'm going to go ahead and just do a little bit of scratching and scoring. A little bit of scratching and scoring. And just kind of roughing it up a little. Get just a little bit of water. And put the eyeball in. Okay, same with this one. Okay, I'm gonna just give it a little wiggle, make sure that it is firmly in there. And now I'm going to do an interesting technique. I'm going to make a little slab. I'm just going to smush this little ball of clay, cut it in half. I'm going to pinch this slabby edge, put it over the eye, and then just smush this because I'm still working on a plastic state. And I'm going to do the same down here. Oops, let me pinch that little slabby edge. And I'm going to close up this eye. Alright, I'm going to keep going. Let's see, I'm going to give these ears some space in them. Okay. Okay, I'm going to keep going with details, but something I know is that I don't need all of this clay in here. So something I can do is I can hollow a good bit of it out. So I'm just going to draw a line about 1/4 inch in from the edge. This is going to be my guide to know where to pull the clay out. And then I can use a tool like this ribbon tool to start to bring the clay out. I can wait for this to be a little more set up as well. If I find that my whole piece is moving as I pull the clay out, I can wait and do more later. But we're just going to go ahead and get started. And I want to show you, if you have a taller, thinner piece, like say this is going to be the building one, as you're getting set up, you can actually just take the back of a tool, honestly even this tool would work, put it in there and just wiggle it around, and you just want to kind of feel, imagine you're making a pinch pot but using a tool. So you want to keep your wall about 1/4 inch thick, and then you don't have to worry about this blowing up in the kiln. Alright, so I'm going to keep going. I'll show you when I've got more details on this little buddy. Okay, so I've been working for a little while. I sort of refined this area. I finished both eyes and the ears. I need to put more details in the face. I decided to do something kind of wild, give this a lot of legs, but because that would be a little bit fussy to carve them all out and have this balance, I decided to just push this back. I used this corner of this needle tool. A chopstick would do the trick as well. I pushed this back so it would recede, and then I added some details here, kind of like tentacle suction cup kind of looking. As this sets up, I'm going to go in and smooth this more so that it just recedes into the background, but I still have a nice solid base for my knight. That goes all the way around. Now I'm going to add some spikes to the back here. So maybe it looks like you could ride this creature, but it would not be very comfortable. Like we talked about with our pinch pot feet, or any feet, I'm going to make my spikes have a bit of a fatter base. Here's the spike that I made. I made it have a little bit of a fat base, so I've got a good point of contact. What I'm going to do is I'm going to make several of these, and I'm going to let them get just a little bit hard. They're teeny tiny. The clay is actually losing moisture as I work with it with my hands, but I want them to stiffen up just enough that I can scratch and score them into place without squishing their, sharp tips. That way they still feel really spiky. Okay? And when I get ready to do that, I will show you, but I'm going to make them all right now, let them set up along with this before I attach them. Quick troubleshooting tip. When we're modeling like this and we're just working with the clay in our hands, you may have already noticed it's going to start to lose moisture, and that's because our hands will actually pull some of the moisture from it. So something that I do is, besides just keeping my plastic nearby to set my clay in when I'm not using it, as I'm working with little bits of clay, I have my water nearby. It's under my table here, but I'll get my hand just a bit wet, and I will just wipe the water on both hands, and then I'll squish my clay, or if I'm making like one of these little spikes, I'll prep the clay for that with my hands just slightly moist. The key is to get them moist enough that the clay absorbs the water, but not so wet that you end up with a slippery, muddy mess, which isn't that always the balance we're trying to make in ceramics. So I'm going to go ahead and keep making these spikes. So I've added some detail to the face. And I will say one trick that I love is using the side of the needle tool to add some texture. For example, instead of scratching with the tip of the tool, just pressing the tool in. Make some nice marks in my opinion. I've started to do a bit of smoothing here, so you can see how this recedes into the background. I just trimmed off the extra. I'll continue hollowing this. And real quick, these have set up a bit. It really didn't take long at all, just a few minutes. And I'm gonna go ahead and add them to the back here. All right, so I'm just doing a little bit last smoothing. Got my water bucket down here. And I'm going to use my needle tool to scratch and score each one. But first I'm going to go ahead and place them. So I think I'm going to put 3 up here, 3 smaller ones. For right now they stick, but they won't stick for long. So just getting an idea of where I want these to go. Okay, and now I'm going to start scratching and scoring. Okay, so I'm almost done. I am going to just clean up those construction points when it's had time to homogenize. So I'm going to put it in plastic overnight. I'm going to finish cleaning up these sections here so they all look nice and smooth, like this one. And then I'm going to finish hollowing out the bottom just so I don't have to worry about like this hump or this bump exploding in the kiln. But there is my almost finished knight. For my set, I need 2 of these, so I'm going to make another one. It doesn't need to be exactly the same, they just need to look like they're from the same family or the same species in this case.